presentation of CCNA1 Chapter 2 Part 2, which is about getting started and configuring a network device. So we're going to have a look at how to set up the basic stuff in a switch. We're going to do it with a switch because it's quite simple and you don't really need that much of a configuration to get it work. Actually, you don't need any configuration to get a switch up and running. It will already be that way when you unpack it, but we will just today show you the more simple ways of configuring it. So we're going to set up a name for the switch, we are going to set up an IP address for the switch, we're going to set up some kind of passwords to protect it, and we're going to set up and save the configuration. Yeah. First one is to get the name. It has no functionality whatsoever on the network. It will just make you as an administrator of the network make things easier for you because you can give them the device names so that you will know it when you start configuring it. Only letters, and then if you have, for instance, like 20 different switches, you will know which one you are connected to. For instance, if you have a switch 1, floor 3, for instance. So in this case here in the lab, they are called S1, S2, S3. So it's up to you how you name them. It's just to make it easier for you. And when you are going to name a switch, you go into the configuration mode by entering configure terminal. Configure terminal will change from privileged mode to configuration mode. And then you just enter the command host name and then a name you want. For instance, in this case here, host name switch floor 1. And then it's already changed. You might also want to protect your devices by putting in some different passwords. I think there are 4 different ways of putting in passwords. The first one is just saying enable password. That will make you be prompted for a password when you switch from user mode to privileged mode. The password itself will be saved in the configuration file in clear text. So it's not a very good way of putting in a password. So we don't use that. Instead, we use the command enable secret, because then the password would be encrypted. So you put in enable secret and the password you want, and then you will be prompted for a password when you go from user mode to enable mode or to privileged mode. When you say enable. Then you also might want to have a password when you just connect directly with the blue cable, the console cable, directly into the switch. If someone does that, have physical access to it and can do that, you still want it to be asked for a password, and that is the console password. Then the last one is the VTY password. That is when you connect to the device over the network, for instance, by using Telnet. Yep. So here, the way to set up the enable password from when you go from user mode to privileged mode. Because in privileged mode, you are able to do whatever you like. You can change the configuration, you can view the configuration. So you need to have that protected by the password. So you go into configure terminal, you say enable secret. In this case, the password will be class. And then you can try it immediately after that by going, exiting the privilege mode and going back to enable mode again. So enable secret is the command to use. If you want to protect the console access, where you put in the console cable, then you go to configuration mode and you say line console 0. It only has one console port, and that is number 0. Then you say password, and then the password you would like to have. In this case, it's Cisco. And then you say login. Login is just to enable the login function. And then exit. Then you have set the password for the console port. If you also want to set password on the telnet, and the network connections. Then you go to line VTY for virtual terminal. And in this case, from 0 to 15 means that you can have 16 simultaneous telnet sessions. You can also set it from 0 to 4 if you only want 5 simultaneous network connections. And then you go in and say password, Cisco, if you like the same one, and log in. So then you have set the telnet passwords as well. These two passwords will be visible in clear text if you do a show running config to see the configuration file. They are not encrypted. If you want all of your passwords to be encrypted, then there is a command called service password encryption. If you enable that, then everything will be encrypted within your configuration file. It could be a good idea because you can actually save the configuration as a text file, and if someone gets hold of that, you can actually just open it as a text file and see your passwords. So it is a good idea to just encrypt the one that's possible. Another thing you can do is that you can set up a banner message. It's just a text that will be shown when you connect to the switch or the router. You do it with a command called banner MOTD for message of the day. Then you have two types of, in this case, a hashtag, which will give you the text that will be displayed. In this case here, this is a secure system, authorized access only. I think it's stupid to use it, because if someone sees a text like this, you will think, oh, that's something interesting. Let me try to break into it. So if it just displays nothing, then it will tell nothing. So, but still, you could put it in if you like, with the banner command. When you have made this configuration and you want to save it, well, then you can first of all just do a show running config. If everything is okay, well, then you can say copy running config to startup config. Then you will save the running configuration into the startup, and it will be saved for the next power off. If you want to power off the device without going all the way over and unplugging the power, then you can just say reload. The reload will then reboot your device. And then it will ask you, if you haven't saved the configuration, do you want to save it? If you say no, well, then nothing is saved and you have either an empty or the previous configuration still saved. If you say yes, well, then your running configuration will be saved into your startup configuration. If there is something in the switch when you open it and you want to reset everything, then you use a command called erase startup configuration. Also on the switch, you might have set up some different VLANs and you want to also delete the VLAN DAT file. So two things if you want to erase and restart a switch: erase the startup config and delete the VLAN DAT file. Yeah? If you have made a configuration and you're satisfied and you think this is it, now I want to, of course you want to save it in the device, but I want to have a backup of it as well. Because maybe you have like 10 different switches and they should all have the same configuration. Then you can save it into a text file in Hyperterminal or in PuTTY, or whatever you have a device or the network terminal program. Then you can capture the text and, for instance, say show running config and then end the capture, and then you will have a complete copy of the configuration within a text file. And this text file can be used if you have a switch 2 and you want to configure that in the exact same way. Then you can just enter the commands from the text file into the switch again. So it's very easy if you have made one configuration and you want to repeat that. Maybe you just changed the name and the IP addresses, then you just go into the text file and change that and then save it into the next switch. So text files are a very good tool to have a backup of your configuration, and if you're going to configure multiple devices. Yep. Now we want to have an IP address in these switches. A switch itself doesn't really need one, but sometimes it's easier. For instance, if you want to configure it through the network, then it needs some kind of an IP address. We're going to work with IP version 4 addresses here in the beginning of the curriculum. And we know these addresses when we see them. It's, for instance, here 192.168.1.1, and it's put in a structure called a dotted decimal. We have 4 parts of the IP addresses. Each and every one of them are actually 8 bits, binary digits, and we put them into decimal numbers because human beings we don't like binary numbers, we like decimal numbers. So this is just an IP address. I will talk much more about that later on in this curriculum. So we just put in an IP address here. This is an example from an old Windows computer. We might also want to configure what kind of a media, what kind of a cable would we like to put in to our ports. Is it are we going to allow both it to communicate in both ways, or are we just going to make it communicate in 100 megabit or whatever? So there are different ways of configuring the ports as well. Yeah. So to set up a virtual interface, which is actually what we are doing when we are configuring an IP address on a switch,